Well, welcome back, everybody. We are joining you once again to talk about all of our favorite films and the ways that they just make the world such a better place. My name is Devorah Governale.
And I'm Carrie Parker.
And today we wanted to dive into one of our favorite directors and one of his masterpieces, which next year, actually, I'm pretty sure, is when it hits its 30th anniversary. How are we at 29 years? And that film is The Fifth Element. So we love Luc Besson. I did date one guy in college that was like way into him, and I want to say that the movie he loved was The Big Blue. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, Joe's favorite Luc Besson is The Professional. So I didn't really know that one until I met him, but we've watched that one several times, and that was Natalie Portman's first film. She was phenomenal. I'm pretty sure she was 11 when they filmed that. So speaking of Star Wars, there's a Star Wars cross-check. Yeah, you're welcome to. But her performance was incredible for how intense that content was. And then, of course, Luc Besson must have loved working with Gary Oldman, because then he cast him again a few years later.
Gary Oldman.
In Fifth Element. So Fifth Element was a story that he actually had been working on from the time he was about 16 years old. It was something he had been kind of dreaming up and really thinking about. You've got, again, we've talked about like the hero's journey elements and your very classic good versus evil. You've got this big rock meteor coming at life to try to take it all out, and everyone has to try to work hard to save the day with the weapon of light that's going to take out the darkness. But so he's dreamed that all up around age 16, and he was actually 38 when the film itself was released. So yeah, he's a really great director, and he's put some really great stories out there. We also have talked about how much we love Lucy. I love Lucy. We love Lucy with Scarlett Johansson. Just another really fun sci-fi from him.
I love The Transporter. So this is an interesting concept
Jason
for me.
Statham?
And it's one of, it's Jason Statham.
Yes.
And it's one of the reasons that I also love Fifth Element is the fact that he often does very strong male leads who are not the most outspoken characters. We get that in Fifth Element. Bruce Willis, who classically, the Luc Besson situation is that Fifth Element, The Professional, Transporter, they're all a little more stoic, if you will, but what I genuinely love about that from a directing, acting, filmmaking, storytelling angle is nonverbal communication. So now that's what I see it as, is the reality that as a director, he is making the actors emote more, right? Give the message without words. She is Leelu Dallas in Fifth Element, and again, not the most verbal communication, yet we still get a very good portrait of who she is as a character. And what I love is that in the beginning, we have the historical element kind of origin story and aliens, right?
Which and now is over a century ago, but it's kind of wild to think that it was still not quite a century when this film came out. Because it's 1914 is the very first scene that we see in the film. Also with an old school, star with Luc Perry. It's like, there's Luc Perry. I remember that when this film came out.
Yeah, and it establishes that there is this religious sect of monks who are supposed to be protecting the four elements. And then you get our big bad. Our big bad is actually just darkness, which ironically, we just talked about Moana, we've talked about Thunderbolts, we've talked about this concept of darkness as kind of a looming representation of evil, depression, etc. But the fact that they weren't sure what it was, but it was moving, and then it would consume planets.
Speed, yeah.
Yeah, and then it was picking up speed.
Just destroying everything.
And so we see these spaceships of the aliens that we see in the beginning, but something happens to the one, and then somehow it's Leelu when the body is reconstructed, which is so interesting because the representation that look like armadillos.
Yeah,
if we're very honest, it looks like armadillos, metal armadillos. So, and then I have literally argued with friends that for all of Chris Tucker's whole entire resume, this is my favorite Chris Tucker ever, period. There's so much going on in this character. It's so well done. And he's so blatantly over the top, but Chris Tucker manages to still make him endearing. To create that much of a memorable, iconic character that's not even in the movie from beginning to end, kudos, sir, because that is talent, that's skill. So we also have the lady who's the opera singer.
Oh, so
again, another very iconic visual.
Yeah, her costume always blew my mind because it was one of those like, where does her skin end and the costume itself actually begin? Because it was all just that blue all the way down, and the way the skirt almost felt like it was made of rubber. Mm-hmm. It was a cool costume. She had a cool look.
It was super cool, but it's also, she sacrificed herself for the cause ultimately, because I love the bait and switch, like a shell game. Mm-hmm. And so they think that the stones are in her room in a chest, but actually they're
tear it
inside
apart looking
her.
For it.
Yeah.
It's not there.
Huge scene when she's injured. He's especially doting on her and comforting of her, which establishes then they have to get the stones to the ancient thing that we saw in the beginning, and they jet over there
to the temple. Yeah.
And they make it happen, and the very climactic scene that I love, how they're each trying to find the element. The idea that one of the stones opens because they breathed on it and it was the air one.
Because they can't figure out. They're like, cool, dude, how do we even get this machine to work? We got the stones, we got to the temple. What the heck are we doing now?
I love it. And I love how well that was written, that it doesn't just seem like they knew things they shouldn't know. He did it well, where it's like, oh, the air one opened when somebody went, so the fact that they're all like, oh, the elements maybe open them.
I will say, though, the whole point of the system they had was that you've got the elder and you've got the apprentice, and clearly somewhere in the 1,000 of years of telephone that training was, they missed essentially the most important piece of information to continue to pass down to apprentices. Like how to act, like, great that you understand how sacred and important this is and the basic overview. Yeah. But, good thing they figured that out literally seconds before it was too late. Yeah. Hopefully this young man who's like spazzing out will take that lesson, and as they now teach the next apprentice for the next time this comes around, they will actually be like, don't forget, the most important piece of information is that this is how the story...
The pinnacle moments where we realize that fifth element is love. Yeah. And that is what Leelu is, and the fact that, love it, that a man saying I love you and how vulnerable that makes them, and the fact that he didn't want to say it necessarily because it felt premature, right? That we feel with saying those words to somebody, but they're like, you have to tell her that's the final element. So he finally says, I love you, and then it works. And Gary Oldman, adorable, love him. One of his little quintessential sci-fi baddie villain moments. The other one was Lost in Space. That's my other Gary Oldman being a sci-fi villain. But I love Gary Oldman. It's a weakness of mine.
Classic. He's so great. Yeah. Well, and he does such a great job of essentially being kind of the villain that we are interacting with for most of the film, because of course the main danger that is very quickly approaching and that has to be obliterated is this darkness in the form of this meteor. But it's Gary Oldman that is kind of the physical villain that they're constantly contending with throughout the film.
Ironically, he's kind of the Renfield for the evil void entity.
Yeah, they clearly have got some kind of deal on, and poor Gary Oldman, poor Zorg, he clearly is so naive, and he actually believes he's going to get anything out of this deal when really what's coming for him is the same as everyone else, which is just impending doom. So he keeps doing the bidding. He's being the hands for this darkness that's coming. And I think that is a good takeaway from this film is, maybe we've got some motives that are less than filled with integrity, and we are leaning into those because we think we're going to get something out of it. But I think it's important to know that things don't always turn out the way you think they're going to, especially when your motives are a little more nefarious. And so it's literally just better to lean on the side of right and helping other people and putting good in the world, because it's not always going to turn out the way you think it's going to. We just talked about The Matrix, and it's the same thing. Our little kind of side villain, side to the whole AI situation, is so convinced that if he shares very important information, he'll get plugged back in when it should be obvious that's not possible. That's not what it's worth. They don't care about him enough to actually fulfill their end of the bargain. Yeah.
He's just a cog in the machine.
Yeah, it's literally not worth it. You know, most of the times the consequences you get are from your own undoing, your own choices. So it's just better to lean into right. And again, very strong themes of dark versus light. She becomes a literal beam of light, has to be held up by Dallas, held up by Corden, and she's just completely out of strength by the time she gets there. But it is literal light versus dark. The darkness is assuaged, it's gone. We have to wait another, whatever it is, 500 years, 1500 years. The darkness will be back, and hopefully that next generation will take care of it again. And that also, I think, is a really important imagery that we get from this film, is the fact that we it's a battle that's never fully won. You know, the war is never fully won. We're always in that battle of the light versus dark. It's part of what our existence is. It's how we gain strength. It's how we gain wisdom. Whatever your darkness is that you're battling, we're all constantly in that, and it always cycles back around, and hopefully you've gained strength and knowledge to do even better the next time you're battling with that. But yeah, I think this film has become such a cult classic because you had such basic core themes that we all can relate to in our own realm, our own world.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I know we talked about he's had the idea for so long, and we went through his resume prior to this, and Valerian, interestingly, was the inspiration. It was based on comic books, the Valerian comic books that he read as a kid. And then he dreamt up a space odyssey, essentially, this idea of the hero and what he has to do. And so I love the fact that he then later in his career actually got to make the Valerian film. Yeah. Luc Besson has been one of my favorite directors, so just like your husband. Big Blue, I don't think I ever watched, though.
I don't think I've watched it since literally before I met you.
I'd heard of it. I know it was a really big deal. La Femme Nikita, I know Shelby and I watched because we were like doing the deep dive because we loved Fifth Element so much. And that's one of my favorite things, is like realizing I like this director. I like what they're doing, what they're putting out there, and then like deep diving and looking into their work. But thank you so much. This is amazing. We love being able to talk about movies in that way, but also identify the storytellers, in this case, Luc Besson, who create these stories and how they are so impactful, but also how we then love them as storytellers and some of the other stories that they decide to put out there in the world, and how grateful we are for that.
Yeah, for sure. Yay. Well, thank you again. We can't wait to talk to you about more fun films in the future. Drop in a comment. Do you love Fifth Element? Is there another Luc Besson film that you love more?
Yeah.
And we can't wait to talk more movies with you soon. Thanks so much for joining us, guys. Bye.